lungs beat without air, a heavy, leathern sound that seemed to press the cold straight through my coat and into my bones. The fire at our feet went sideways, smoke drawn toward the ravine, though there was no wind. Joseph whispered, "It is behind us," but did not turn. Above the black line of the ridge, something glowed a dull, sickly green, as if rotting fruit had learned to fly. Men have asked me to recount this, though few believe the manner in which we left those mountains. If my tale has any use to you, then mark it, and lend your approval below, and tell others what you make of it. It began 3 weeks earlier, on the 8th of August, 1886, when our little party left the mission at Finschhafen and turned our faces inland toward the Finisterre Range. We were 4 Europeans and 6 local carriers from a village near the coast, plus 1 older Papuan who was not a carrier at all, but who joined us of his own accord. The German surveyor, Herr Dr. Weiss, led the expedition under orders to fix certain points for future maps. Beside him walked Joseph Miller, a young English botanist with more books than sense, and myself, Arthur Bell, then assistant to the colonial administration. The fourth was a Lutheran pastor named Kraus, whose task it was to observe the people of the interior and, if possible, establish some introduction. The old man who joined us called himself Kalo. He stood little more than my shoulder in height, scarred across the chest with the crocodile pattern of his people. He carried a spear older than I was, and a bundle of smoked fish wrapped in banana leaf. He had lost much of his hair, yet his eyes were clear and restless. I remember how, that first evening beyond the last gardens, he sat near me, shared a twist of local tobacco, and asked haltingly about my own home. "You have mountains there also, Bell," he said, his English a patchwork learned from traders and missionaries. "Hills only," I answered. "Soft hills and hedges, nothing like these." I gestured toward the dim outline of the range, far inland, its highest ridges already hidden in cloud. "My son," he said, tapping his chest, "he go to those hills. No come back." He did not say more, and I, with a younger man's thoughtlessness, did not press him. Had I understood then what name he would later speak, I might have turned back that very night. At first, the journey resembled a dozen others I had made. We followed the Busu River, then struck north toward the foothills. Our equipment was typical for the period and place: canvas tents, a small theodolite and chain for Weiss, botanical presses for Joseph, a field altar chest for Kraus, Enfield rifles for myself and the German, and trade goods for the villages. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the sweetness of overripe fruit, and the insect chorus set up at dusk like some vast, unseen orchestra. The first anomaly presented itself after 5 days of march, when the ground began to rise in earnest. We had made camp beside a narrow stream, its water cold enough to numb the fingers. Above us, the jungle climbed steeply toward a broken line of cliffs. I woke in the night to the sound of something moving in the trees, not with the light, quick rustle of a possum, nor the heavy crash of a wild pig, but with a curious dragging rhythm, as if something heavy brushed through the branches without disturbing the leaves. Joseph, who shared my tent, stirred and whispered, "Birds?" "No bird that I know," I replied. But we heard nothing further, and in the morning there were no tracks upon the soft earth near the stream. Only later did I recall that the noises had seemed to come not from ground level, but from somewhere higher, as though the trees themselves creaked with contained weight. We pressed on, meeting a small village 3 days later. The people there were wary but not hostile. They gave us sago and taro in exchange for beads and small knives. It was there that I first heard the word. Kraus, with his usual zeal, asked the headman whether spirits troubled these hills. The man laughed, showing beetle-stained teeth, and said something to Kalo in their own tongue. The old man's face tightened. "He speak of Ropen," Carlo translated unwillingly. "Night thing. Big. Take pigs. Sometimes men." Weiss made a note in his book. "A local devil," he said to me under his breath. "Every region has one." Joseph, his pockets already stuffed with new leaves, asked with boyish eagerness, "Is it a bird, Kalo?" Kalo shook his head. "Not bird," he said. He drew his hands wide apart in the air, as if to show wings far larger than those of any eagle. Then he fell silent, staring at the ridge that rose behind the village, where clouds snagged like dirty wool upon the jagged edge. We were not alarmed. In those days, I had an official's distrust of unverified tales. The jungle bred monsters in the imagination, fed by half-understood shadows and the cries of unseen animals. Yet from that village onward, something in our journey altered. The nights grew colder with each day's climb, though it was the damp, clinging chill that crept under blankets and kept one wakeful. On the 10th day, Weiss observed that the birdsong had diminished. The first hours of morning were still lively enough, but by afternoon the forest fell strangely quiet. The great hornbills that had followed us, flapping from tree to tree, no longer appeared. Once, around midday, we surprised a troop of macaques. Instead of chattering defiance, they froze, then fled upslope in a panicked scramble, as if pursued by some unseen threat. "Perhaps hunters," I suggested to Joseph. "Then where are their arrows?" he replied. "And why that smell?" We both noticed it then, a faint taint on the air, not strong enough to identify, but unpleasant, like a lizard cage left too long uncleaned, with a sourness beneath it, almost like corruption. That night, as we sat close to the fire, Kalo spoke little. He stared into the flames, his hand resting upon his spear. The carriers whispered among themselves, glancing repeatedly toward the dark line of the ridge. Only the crackle of the fire and the muttering of distant frogs disturbed the air. At some point, I realized that the usual chorus of insects was absent. "Do you hear that?" I asked quietly. "Hear what?" Weiss replied, busying himself with his notebook. "Precisely," I said. "Nothing." He smiled without humor. "Your English ears are too accustomed to bells and carts. The forest is never truly silent." Yet it was. The silence pressed upon us like a physical thing. When the wind stirred, the leaves rustled almost with relief, as if nature itself wished to prove that it still lived. On the 12th day, we found the tracks. We had climbed to a narrow saddle between two ridges, where the vegetation thinned slightly and the air became raw and misty. There, in a patch of softer ground near a trickling rill, lay impressions that did not match any animal known to me. They were three-toed, each toe tipped with a deep, curved gouge as if made by a hook. The span from the back of the heel to the tip of the middle toe exceeded the length of my own boot by a hand's breadth, yet the track was narrow, almost dainty. Weiss knelt, frowning. Some great cassowary, perhaps, distorted by the mud, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Cassowary do not walk here," Kalo murmured. "Too high, too cold." The line of prints led for perhaps 30 paces, then stopped at the edge of a low drop. I expected to find more at the bottom, but there were none. The ground there lay untouched, save for fallen leaves. It leaped, Joseph suggested. Something that heavy cannot leap so far without leaving a mark, I answered. We spread out, searching the area, but the tracks simply ceased at the lip, as though the maker had stepped out into the air and continued its journey upon an invisible road. That afternoon, a fine, colourless mist descended, limiting our sight to a few yards. The damp seemed to find every seam and button. Our matches grew unreliable. By evening, even Vice conceded that we should make camp where we were, though it was an exposed place. We pitched the tents close together, our fire burning low for want of dry wood. Somewhere in the mist above us, a rock gave way, clattering down with a sound that seemed unnervingly like deliberate footsteps upon stone. The microshock came just before midnight. I woke to a sound like someone drawing a heavy cloth slowly across dry skin. The tent wall near my head bulged inward, as if pressed by a broad, flat surface from outside. The canvas grew suddenly colder against my cheek, and through it I smelled that same faint musk and sourness, stronger now, with a thread of carrion in it. "Who is there?" I called, my voice harsher than I intended. Joseph jerked awake. At my shout, I thrust my hand against the bulge. Something hard and smooth resisted for an instant, like a polished horn, then withdrew with a soft scrape. The tent sprang back into shape. Outside, the mist muffled any sound. I leaped from my blankets, seized my rifle, and burst out, expecting a raider or some curious animal. There was nothing. The mist walled us on every side. The fire had burned low, the embers a faint red island in a sea of grey. Around me, the other tents stirred. Weiss called, "What is the matter?" Something touched the tent, I said. "Right here. I felt it." Kalo emerged, spear in hand, eyes wide and white in the gloom. "No, call it," he muttered. "Better to sleep, Bell. Better not to speak loud." No one slept much after that. We sat about the embers, rifles near to hand, but nothing further occurred. By dawn, the mist had lifted, revealing only our own footprints and the ashes of the fire. There were no marks upon the tent wall. Had I not shared the memory with Joseph, I might have doubted my own senses. From that day, the rational explanations we offered one another grew thinner. The air itself seemed to change as we climbed. We passed from zones of humid heat to pockets of unnatural cold, so sharply defined that one could step between them as between sun and shade. Once, in a full afternoon, we entered a gully where our breaths smoked before us, though the sun rode high and bright above the ridge. The carriers began to mutter. Twice they spoke the word Ropen when they thought we did not hear. On the 15th day, as we followed a narrow ledge along a cliff face, we encountered the first discarded thing. It was a woven net, half torn, hung upon a fang of rock, as though flung there by a careless hand. It bore the pattern of a tribe from further inland, according to Kalo, and its cords were stiff with some dark stain that might have been old blood, though the rain should have washed it away long before. A single human tooth lay tangled in the cord. We could not account for it. No village lay within 2 days' march, and the ledge upon which we walked would not admit a loaded man without forcing him to cling to the rock itself. There were no bones, no other sign of a fall. Only later did I recall the way the net's upper cords were frayed, as if something with small sharp teeth had worried at them while the thing still hung in the air. Our direct encounter came on the 17th day. We had established a more permanent camp in a narrow basin surrounded by steep slopes, with a clear view of the sky above. Weiss wished to take star sights, and we were glad of a relatively level space. By then, the carriers were restless, and Kalo had twice urged us to go no farther, saying we had reached the boundary of what men might cross unbidden. Weiss, however, held his orders like a shield against such talk. That evening, a thin, high wind sprang up, running along the ridges like water along a gutter. Clouds moved swiftly, their underbellies lit by a faint, discolored moon. Around the fire, we spoke of home. Joseph told us of his mother in Surrey, who believed him safe in some tidy plantation, and of the girl he hoped would wait for his return. Kraus described the snow in Saxony and how the church bells there sounded on Christmas morning. I found myself speaking of a small stone bridge in my own village, and the way the sunlight struck the river at autumn, and for a moment the jungle receded and the world seemed almost ordinary. Then, without warning, the wind died. The fire continued to burn, but its smoke rose straight up. The insect chorus, which had been faint but present, it cut off so abruptly that I at first thought I had gone deaf. Even our own breathing sounded loud. A coldness settled over us, not the cool of night, but the clammy chill of a cave. "Do you feel that?" Joseph whispered. Kalo rose slowly to his feet, his spear lifting as if of its own accord. His eyes were fixed upon the dark line of the upper slope. At first, I heard nothing. Then, from somewhere above the basin, there came a sound like the creak of a great leather strap being drawn over a pulley. It repeated, rhythmic, too slow for any bird's wings, yet unmistakably a beating of some kind. The glow appeared next. It was not bright, but it was out of place. A diffuse greenish light like that from phosphorus, moving slowly along the ridge. It outlined the upper branches of the tallest trees in an unwholesome halo as it passed, and I thought of corpse lights in English churchyards, of which old women spoke in my childhood, and dismissed the recollection at once, for this thing moved with intention. Weiss muttered, "Some electrical manifestation," but his voice shook. The sound of the wings grew clearer. There was a drag in them, a weight as though each stroke pushed against a reluctant medium. The glow descended, following the contour of the basin, not rolling like a ball, but dipping and rising with a living rhythm. When it passed behind a knoll, the light did not scatter, but vanished, then reappeared, as if attached to a solid form. The animals went before we saw it. From the far side of the basin came a frantic rustle, and then a wallaby burst into view, scrambling downslope with complete disregard for obstacles. It passed within yards of the fire, eyes wild, and vanished among the lower trees. Behind it, something moved through the upper darkness, obscuring stars. Then it came into sight. I can put words to its parts, but they do not comprise the thing itself. It was larger than any eagle, with a span of wing that stretched, I thought wildly, as wide as the great hall in the governor's residence. Yet the wings were not feathered. They shone in the firelight with a dull, stretched sheen, like oiled canvas or the skin of a bat. And between their struts the night showed through, as if the membrane were half transparent. Its head seemed too large for the body, set upon a thick, muscled neck. The jaw, when it opened, disclosed a row of conical teeth, small but very many. From some point along its length, perhaps the end of its tail, there hung a sort of barb or lappet that glimmered with that same unhealthy green phosphorescence we had seen along the ridge. The light did not illumine the ground, but only itself, like a lantern wrapped in thin cloth. It did not stoop upon us. In truth, that was the most dreadful part. It passed slowly along the upper rim of the basin, as if inspecting us, keeping just beyond the reach of any shot we might hazard. The sound of its wings filled the hollow, each beat accompanied by that dry, rasping note I had heard against the tent. Kalo broke first. With a cry that was more rage than fear, he hurled his spear upslope. The weapon arced through the air, a straight, brave line against the dark. It fell short by a cruel yard. The creature shifted, not in alarm, but with a slow, disdainful tilt of its body, and the spear struck stone. "Do not fire," Weiss hissed. "We cannot risk provoking it." His caution came too late. Joseph, pale as paper, had already raised his rifle. "It is not possible," he whispered. "Whether to himself or to us, I do not know," and pulled the trigger. The report cracked across the basin like a baton on a drum. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the creature turned its head fully toward us. Its eyes did not shine red or yellow as one hears in tavern tales. They were dark, almost black, yet I felt them as one feels the gaze of a man in the next room. The green glow along its tail brightened as if in answer to the shot. It did not scream. Instead, there came a low, almost groaning sound from its chest, a vibration rather than a cry that seemed to tremble in my teeth. The fire guttered sideways, its flames bending toward the slope, drawn by a sudden, inexplicable pull. Sparks streamed up and away like a reversed waterfall. The air grew very thin, and for a terrible instant, I felt as though the ground might lift from under my feet, as if the whole basin lurched toward that thing. Then, as suddenly as it had brightened, the glow dimmed. The creature banked, its great wings barely stirring, and slipped away along the ridge. Within seconds, it had become only a darker shadow among shadows, and then nothing. The insects resumed, first a hesitant chirp here and there, then the full raucous chorus, as if some conductor had given a signal. The fire straightened and rose normally. All at once, the world returned. We remained standing, rifles half raised, long after there was nothing to see, and my hands shook so violently that I could scarcely work the bolt to chamber a second round. At length, Kraus crossed himself with a hand that trembled. "It was no beast that God made," he whispered. "Then who made it?" I asked, but there was no answer, and perhaps it was a sinful question. From that night, our purpose in the mountains altered. We had come to measure and to map, to bring the unknown within the compass of survey lines and written notes. Instead, we thought only of leaving. The carriers, who had endured much without open complaint, refused to climb higher. They would go down, they said, or not at all. Carlo spoke not of refusal, but of necessity. "It see us now," he said. "It know our smell. We go, or it follow." Weiss argued, of course. He pointed to his instruments, to the governor's letter of commission, and to the half-completed sketches in his book. Yet even he could not deny the look in the men's eyes, nor the weight that seemed to gather upon the upper slopes whenever we paused. After a day of bitter dispute, he agreed to turn back, though there was no triumph in the decision. The descent should have taken 5 days. It took 9. We were not pursued in the manner of a chase. There was no constant presence at our heels, no echo of wings overhead at every step. Rather, there were incidents, each small in itself, which together ground us down. On the second day of descent, we found one of the carrier's packs torn open where it had lain beside a tree. The contents were rummaged, not scattered as a pig might have done, but laid out as if examined. Only the dried meat was missing. The canvas itself bore two small, neat punctures close together, which had gone straight through as if made by a slender auger. The ground around showed no prints but our own. On the fourth day, as we crossed the same saddle where we had seen the impossible tracks, a cold fog rolled in without warning. Within minutes, visibility fell to a few yards. The sound of our own footfalls seemed muffled, as if trodden into wool. Somewhere ahead, a man cried out. When we reached the front of the file, one of the younger carriers was gone. His pack lay in the path, straps torn cleanly as if sliced by a knife. We searched both slopes as well as we dared, calling his name until our throats ached. No answer came back. There were no broken branches, no sign of a fall, no blood. Joseph wept openly that night. He was a boy, he said. He laughed at my poor Tokpisen. I do not even know his name as his mother said it. You could not have saved him, I told him, though I did not believe my own words. On the sixth day, as dusk fell, the sky to the north lit with a faint green glow along the line of the higher peaks. It did not move as before, but flickered, appearing and vanishing as if several such lights danced along the ridge. We built our fire larger than usual, against Weiss' objection, and kept watch in pairs. No creature descended upon us that night, but I felt its possibility hanging over the camp like a physical weight. By the time we reached the lower villages, our party was reduced by 2 carriers and much of our former certainty. The people received us with guarded curiosity. When Kalos spoke to them in their own language, they listened, then turned their eyes to the mountains and spat upon the ground. I recall vividly the morning we first saw the sea again, a pale strip beyond the last line of trees. The relief that washed through me was so profound that I stumbled and nearly fell. One of the remaining carriers laughed, not in mirth, but with the thin, brittle sound of tension breaking. At Finchhafen, the officials listened to our account with increasing skepticism. Weiss, who had been so shaken in the hills, regained something of his old stiffness. In the formal report he prepared for the governor, the missing carriers became lost in fog following a probable rockfall, and our nocturnal visitor upon the ridge was attributed to an unusually large specimen of indigenous bat, possibly of a hitherto undescribed species, exhibiting phosphorescent phenomena. It will not serve anyone to write more, he told me privately. They will think us drunk or mad or liars, and the administration's work will be impaired. And the dead? I asked. He looked away. The dead are beyond such concerns. In the years that followed, fragments of our experience entered various records, shorn of their true sharpness. A short paragraph in a geographical society's journal mentioned native legends of large nocturnal birds. A missionary newsletter spoke of superstitious fears in the highlands, hindering evangelization. My own memorandum, more candid, slept untouched in a locked drawer. Officially, there was no Ropen in those mountains. Privately, it never left me. Once, some 10 years after the journey, I met Joseph again in Sydney. Time and the tropics had taken much from him. His hair had thinned. His hands trembled slightly when he lifted his teacup. We spoke of ordinary matters at first. Only when the daylight had faded from the hotel veranda did the conversation turn. "Do you dream of it?" he asked suddenly. "Sometimes," I said. "I dream of the fire," he murmured, the way it bent. I wake when the room begins to tilt, as if the bed is sliding towards something that I cannot see. We shared no further details. There was a peculiar shame attached to that night, as if by naming the thing fully, we might invoke it, like an old curse. Twice, in my later service, I attempted in discreet ways to learn more. A missionary who had spent time further inland spoke of an old song among one tribe, never sung near the mountains, of a night hanger that took men from ledges. A trader told me, over rum, that he had seen lights like swamp gas, far too high in the air to be any such thing. These fragments only deepened the mystery. They did not cohere into explanation. Long after I left New Guinea, far from its humidity and its insect chorus, small things would call those weeks back with painful clarity. The sudden silence before a thunderstorm in London would freeze my spine, recalling that unnatural hush in the basin. The smell of damp leather in some club's cloakroom would carry beneath it a phantom trace of sour musk and decay. Once, passing a butcher's stall at dusk, the greenish cast of the gaslight upon hanging carcasses made me grip the nearest rail until my knuckles whitened. I married, raised children, served in quieter postings. Yet at odd hours, my mind would slip back, unbidden, to that basin, and to the sensation of being weighed by unseen eyes. I would find myself looking out of upper windows on the foggy nights, watching the line where city roof met sky, half expecting to see that diffused, unwholesome glow slide along the silhouettes. In my last years, I returned briefly to New Guinea in an advisory capacity. At a gathering in Ropen, I met a man, a younger officer, who had recently come from an inland patrol near the old German boundaries. Over brandy, he mentioned, as an aside, that one of his native guides had refused to camp near a particular ridge, saying in pidgin, "That place, something hang there at night." The officer laughed at it, as I might once have done. I felt my mouth grow dry. "What did he call it?" I asked. He frowned, trying to recall. "Ropen. Ropen. Some such word. Why? Does it signify anything to you?" I lied and said it did not. There seemed no kindness in passing my unease to another. What name one gives it matters far less than what one does not know. I cannot say whether the thing we saw was unique or of a kind, whether it had any purpose beyond its own continuance, whether it possessed a mind that weighed us as we might weigh cattle. I know only that for a few minutes on a cold, high night in August 1886, we shared the same air with something that did not belong to the world as we imagine it. In the end, the maps were drawn and the lines of latitude and longitude spread over that country as over any other. On paper, the Finisterre Range lies neatly within degrees and minutes. Yet whenever I see that name now in an atlas, my eye drifts upward toward the margin of the page, to the blank where the paper ends and the white space begins. Somewhere in that white, in that place beyond the printed contour lines, I still smell, very faintly, the sour leathern musk that clung to my tent canvas on a night when the fire burned sideways.